The wooden house on the edge of the village always seemed smaller than it actually was, as if shrinking under the weight of silence. Those passing by on the dirt road saw only the uneven roof, the peeling paint, and the thin smoke rising from the chimney on cold days. But what no one saw, because no one got close enough, was the hole covered by old planks at the back of the property, hidden among dry bushes and loose stones. There, buried for decades, lay a cellar of roots that most of the community already considered dead. To the neighbours, it was a remnant of a bygone era, when there was little money for refrigerators and plenty of effort to dig holes in the ground. Now, in the midst of a century of insulated walls and reliable electrical systems, the idea of someone using that space again sounded like unnecessary stubbornness. Even so, the young woman who lived alone in that old house had made an incomprehensible decision. She was going to reopen the cellar, and worse, she planned to adapt it, reinforce it, make it functional for the approaching winter. The community's reaction was swift. When she first mentioned the project at the village's only grocery store, the owner chuckled briefly and went back to organizing cans on the shelf. An older neighbor shook her head with pity, as if watching someone waste their time on something pointless. Another man, with a deep voice and calloused hands, commented loudly enough for everyone to hear. That basement would be the first place to freeze when January arrived, because the cold seeps in through the ground. Everyone knows that. The young woman simply listened, as she always did. She didn't argue, didn't explain her reasons, didn't try to convince anyone. She knew that words wouldn't change what they thought. She also knew that winter wouldn't ask permission to prove who was right. The comments continued for days, spreading from house to house like weeds. She became the subject of quick conversations on the sidewalks, of glances exchanged as she crossed the main street. Some found it funny, others felt sorry for her. Some said she was wasting energy on a ridiculous project when she should be reinforcing the windows or buying more firewood. No one understood why someone would choose to dig deeper instead of better protecting themselves above ground. No one imagined that, within a few weeks, that forgotten hole would be the only truly warm place on the entire property. And that, in January, when the cold turned houses into icy traps, that underground space would cease to be a joke and become the only reason some people were still alive. The village stretched across a wide plain, surrounded by low mountains that never held back the wind. The houses were built close together, as if proximity offered protection against the winter that arrived unannounced every year. Dirt roads cut through the village in straight lines, bordered by white-painted wooden fences that yellowed with time. In the center, there was the grocery store, the small church with its pointed roof, and 3 or 4 brick buildings housing basic services. Everything there seemed to have been built to last only as long as necessary, without luxury, without waste. The air carried the constant smell of wood smoke mixed with damp earth, and at the end of autumn, when the first frosts began to harden the ground, this smell became denser, almost metallic. The sunlight, even at midday, had a pale quality, as if it were always about to give up. The young woman's house was on the outer edge of this social organization, where the main road ended and the bush began. It was the last building before the land became just open field and scattered trees. The property had belonged to her grandparents, then to her parents, and now it was hers alone, since she had returned to live there alone. The house was made of dark wood, with small windows and a sloping roof that accumulated snow without collapsing. Inside, the space was cramped but functional. A bedroom, a kitchen with a wood-burning stove, a room that also served as a storage room. There was no luxury, there was no excessive comfort, but there was silence, and for her, that was enough. The surrounding land was uneven, covered in dry grass and bushes that no one trimmed. In the back, hidden by low vegetation and loose stones, was the old root cellar, a hole dug decades ago, covered by old planks that creaked when stepped on. She had grown up hearing stories about that space. Her grandmother told how they stored potatoes, carrots, onions, and even jars of preserves down there, protected from the summer heat and the extreme winter cold. The basement maintained a stable, constant temperature, indifferent to the brutal changes in the outside climate. But that was in another time, when people still trusted the earth as an ally. Now, no one bothered to dig holes in the ground anymore. There were refrigerators, there were heaters, there was electricity that arrived through wires suspended between wooden poles. The basement had been forgotten, covered up, left to rot in peace. Until she returned. The community never saw her as part of the core group. She didn't attend meetings, didn't participate in parties, didn't offer opinions in discussions about the village. When she spoke, it was little. When questioned, she answered with short, unadorned phrases. This made her seem strange in the eyes of others. There was also a story that everyone knew but no one mentioned openly. She had left years ago, tried to live elsewhere, and returned without explanation. This silent return carried an invisible weight, as if she had failed at something important and was now hiding. People didn't ask, they just assumed. And because they assumed, they treated her with a mixture of pity and distrust. She felt the isolation physically. When she entered the grocery store, conversations lowered in tone. When she crossed the street, glances averted. There was no direct hostility, but there was no acceptance either. She existed on the margins, tolerated but not included. And there was something deeper. Since childhood, whenever she demonstrated practical knowledge about climate, plants, or ancient techniques, she was treated condescendingly. The older men smiled as one smiles at a child who says something naive. The women changed the subject. No one took what she knew seriously because she had no diploma, no recognized authority, no validation that the community demanded to respect someone. What she possessed came from silent observation, from the memory of past generations, from the patience of someone who learns from nature instead of from books. And that, to others, was worth nothing. The decision to reopen the basement wasn't impulsive. She'd thought about it for weeks, watching the sky, feeling the wind change direction, noticing how the birds migrated earlier than usual. The signs were all there, clear as footprints in fresh snow. The winter would be harsh, harsher than previous ones. And she knew from experience and observation that relying solely on electrical systems was betting everything on something fragile. Storms brought down wires, accumulated snow overloaded transformers. When the power went out, modern houses, full of heaters and equipment, turned into icy boxes in a matter of hours. The underground basement, on the other hand, depended on nothing but the earth itself. It wouldn't heat up like a fire, but it would maintain a stable, protected temperature, sufficient for survival. She didn't expect comfort. She expected functionality, and it was this simple, almost primitive logic that led her to make the decision no one else would make. When she first mentioned the plan at the grocery store, the silence that followed was awkward. The store owner, a middle-aged man with a protruding belly and perpetually busy hands, stopped stacking cans and looked at her as if expecting a joke. None came. She simply repeated in a calm voice that she was going to adapt the old root cellar for the winter. The older neighbour, who was buying flour, let out a long sigh and shook her head. That wasn't pity. It was silent disapproval. A man further back, with a dirty cap and a hoarse voice, chuckled softly and commented that the cold seeps in through the ground, that everyone knew that she was wasting her time digging her own icy trap. Others nodded in agreement. No one argued aloud, but the consensus was clear. It was an absurd idea. The following days brought more comments. On the street, women exchanged glances as she passed by. At church, after the service, someone mentioned that she was investing energy in something outdated when she should be reinforcing the windows like everyone else did. Some even suggested, condescendingly, that she buy more firewood or look for a better electric heater. The community's logic was simple. Winter was fought with artificial heat, with above-ground insulation, with reliable technology. Going back to using a hole in the ground seemed not only inefficient but dangerous. There were old stories of basements that accumulated moisture, collapsed, and became deadly traps. These stories were few and vague, but they served as sufficient justification to completely discredit her idea. She didn't defend herself. She didn't try to explain the difference between a poorly constructed basement and a well-sealed one. She didn't mention that the Earth, at a certain depth, maintains a constant temperature regardless of the outside cold. She didn't talk about controlled ventilation, about natural insulation, about how the soil protects instead of freezing. She knew that words wouldn't convince anyone. The community had already decided she was wrong, and any argument would be interpreted as stubbornness. So she just nodded, thanked them for the advice she wouldn't ask for, and went home. The way back seemed longer than usual. The wind cut her face. The sky was heavy with low clouds, and she knew with absolute certainty that no one would believe her until it was too late. The perceived risk wasn't just technical, it was social. Insisting on that project meant distancing herself even further from the community, reinforcing her image as an outsider, as stubborn, as someone who didn't adapt to the accepted way of doing things. It meant being remembered as the woman who wasted time on a useless hole while everyone else was truly preparing. If the winter was mild, she would be ridiculed forever. If it was severe and the basement failed, she would be blamed for her own recklessness. There was no scenario where she would emerge respected unless the impossible happened, that she was right and everyone else was wrong. And nobody, not even herself, was absolutely certain that this would happen. But she went ahead, because the alternative was to do nothing, and that for her was never an option. The first task was to remove the old boards covering the basement entrance. They were rotten in places, covered in damp moss and accumulated dirt. She worked alone, kneeling on the uneven ground, using an improvised lever to loosen each board without breaking them completely. The physical effort was constant but controlled. Each movement needed to be thought out so as not to waste energy. The autumn sun beat weakly on her back, but sweat still trickled down her forehead, soaking her faded flannel shirt. When the last board was removed, the hole was revealed. A rectangular opening approximately 1.5 meters by 2 meters, with stone steps descending into the darkness. The smell rising was of damp earth, old mold, and stagnant air. There was no natural light down there, only dense silence and a cool but not freezing temperature. She descended the steps slowly, testing each stone before placing her full weight on it. Down below, the space was larger than it appeared from above, about 3 meters wide by 4 meters long, with a low wooden ceiling reinforced by cross beams. The walls were made of compacted earth, reinforced in some places by stones stacked without mortar. There were old shelves made of thick planks supported by rusty metal brackets. The floor was of packed earth, hard as old concrete. She spent hours just observing, touching the walls, feeling the temperature, noting where the air entered and where it remained stagnant. There was natural ventilation through a thin pipe that rose to the surface, covered by a metal grate. This pipe allowed minimal circulation, enough to prevent the accumulation of gases, but not enough to let the outside cold dominate the space. It was simple but effective engineering. She mentally noted every detail: where moisture accumulated, where the earth was drier, how the flashlight's light behaved when reflecting off the walls. All of this would matter later. Each observation was a piece of the puzzle she was assembling. The cleanup took 3 full days. She removed remnants of broken shelves, swept away loose soil, and scraped mold from the walls. She used a mixture of lime and water to treat the dampest spots, applying the white paste with her hands protected by old leather gloves. The lime would dry and create a protective layer, reducing excess moisture without completely eliminating the Earth's natural ability to regulate temperature. She knew that zero humidity would be bad. The air would become too dry, cracking her skin and damaging her lungs. Balance was everything. After the cleanup, she reinforced the ceiling beams with new pieces of wood, fastened with long nails that she hammered until each one disappeared completely into the wood. The sound of the hammer echoed in the enclosed space, muffled and repetitive. Each blow sent vibrations through the earthen walls. She worked with precision, without haste, without hesitation. Sealing the cracks was the most delicate step. There were small holes between the stones of the walls, spaces where outside air could enter uncontrollably. She used damp clay mixed with chopped straw, kneading the mixture until it formed a thick paste that stuck to her hands. With her fingers, she pressed the clay into each crack, filling the voids, smoothing the surface. The work was slow and messy. Her nails were full of dirt. Her hands ached from the constant pressure. But each sealed crack meant more control over the internal temperature. She didn't want a hermetically sealed space, but she also didn't want the January wind to enter freely. The ventilation pipe would be enough to renew the air without compromising the insulation. After sealing the walls, she reinforced the access door, a heavy structure of thick wood that closed the basement entrance when viewed from the outside. She added old tire rubber to the edges, creating an improvised seal that would reduce heat loss without completely blocking circulation. The shelves were carefully rearranged. She didn't position them randomly, but thinking about how the air would circulate, where people could sit or lie down if necessary, where it would be best to store supplies. The strongest boards were placed at medium heights, easily accessible. The weaker ones above were reserved for lightweight objects. She tested each shelf with her own weight, raising and lowering it, ensuring it could withstand pressure. She brought old blankets, woolen throws, torn sleeping bags that she sewed by hand. She stacked everything in specific corners, protected from direct moisture. She also lowered gallons of water, cans of food, thick wax candles, and matches stored in airtight containers. It wasn't a luxury shelter. It was a functional shelter. Each item had a clear purpose. Nothing was there by chance. She installed an oil lamp hanging from a hook fixed to the central ceiling beam. The flame would be small but steady, providing enough light and a little extra warmth without consuming too much oxygen. She tested the lamp several times, observing how the smoke rose and dissipated through the ventilation duct. It worked. The space wouldn't fill with smoke. The air circulated slowly, but it circulated. She also marked the depth levels of the shelves with white chalk, creating a visual reference to know where everything was, even in the dim light. These small details, the lamp, the chalk marks, the position of the blankets, seemed insignificant now. But in January, when the cold transformed the outside world into a deadly threat, these details would make the difference between surviving and not surviving. Throughout the entire process, no one came to help. No one asked how it was going. She saw neighbors passing by on the road, watching from afar, but none approached. There was curiosity, but also distance. The community had already decided that the project was absurd, and getting involved would be validating something they considered wrong. So she worked alone, going up and down the steps dozens of times a day, carrying materials, adjusting details, testing solutions. Her hands became calloused, her back ached at the end of each day, but she didn't stop. There was no one to impress. There was no audience. There was only the silent work of preparing something that might or might not work when it was most needed. By the end of the 4th week, the cellar was ready. From the outside, it looked exactly the same, just a hole covered with old boards hidden among bushes. But inside, it was different. The space was clean, organized, fenced off, prepared. The temperature down there was already noticeably more stable than outside. While the mornings froze and the afternoons warmed slightly, the cellar maintained a constant coolness, neither hot nor freezing. She went down one last time before closing everything up, sat on one of the reinforced shelves, and simply breathed. The air smelled of clean earth and treated wood. The silence was complete, and there, in that moment, she knew she had done everything she could. The rest would depend on winter, and on the Earth's ability to do what it always did: protect. Winter arrived slowly, as it always did in that region. First came the morning frosts that covered the grass with a thin layer of white crystals. The dew froze before dawn, transforming each leaf, each branch, each wire of fence into something brittle and shiny. People began to wear heavier coats, to light fireplaces earlier, to check if the electric heaters were working. There was a familiar routine to it all. a ritual repeated every year. The village prepared itself in the same way it always had, reinforcing windows with insulating tape, stacking firewood in the sheds, testing old generators that rustled before starting. No one expected anything different. The winter was harsh, but predictable, or at least that's what everyone believed. The young woman, however, observed the sky with increasing attention. The clouds moved faster than usual. The wind changed direction without a clear pattern, and the birds that should have been migrating had already left weeks earlier than expected. These signs did not lie. The first snowfall was light, almost decorative. Small flakes fell during the afternoon, accumulating in thin layers on rooftops and streets. Children played in the snow, building crooked snowmen and throwing snowballs at each other. Adults cleared the sidewalks with metal shovels, pushing the snow into the corners. Everything seemed normal, but the next morning, the temperature dropped abruptly. The thermometer hanging on the outside wall of the grocery store read 6 degrees below zero before noon. The wind began to blow harder, coming directly from the mountains, bringing with it a biting cold that penetrated clothes and walls. People closed their doors early, turned the heaters to maximum, lit every available fireplace. Energy consumption skyrocketed. The wires suspended between the poles swayed in the wind, creating flickering shadows on the deserted streets. Small problems began to arise. At the Martins family home, the pipe carrying water to the kitchen froze overnight. They tried to thaw it with hot water, but the ice inside was too thick. They were without running water for 2 days. At the Silver family's property, the main heater began making strange noises, high-pitched hisses followed by long silences. They called a technician, but he couldn't identify the problem. The appliance continued to function, but irregularly, heating for a few hours and then shutting off by itself. Nobody considered this a crisis. They were just inconveniences. Things that happened every winter. The grocery store sold more candles, more matches, more thermal blankets. Conversations revolved around the cold, the high energy bills that were coming, and how long that winter would last. But there was still confidence that everything would work out as it always did. Meanwhile, the young woman tested the cellar daily. She descended the stone steps, checked the internal temperature, observed if there was any moisture buildup on the walls, and checked the ventilation. The temperature down there remained constant, cold, but not freezing. It fluctuated very little, regardless of what happened on the surface. When the outside thermometer read -10, the cellar maintained something close to 4 or 5 degrees above zero. It wasn't hot, it wasn't comfortable, but it was stable, and stability, she knew, was worth more than temporary warmth. She adjusted small details, moved some blankets to more accessible positions, added more candles, brought an extra gallon of water. Each visit to the cellar reinforced her confidence in her own preparedness, but it also increased her apprehension, because if the winter worsened, as the signs indicated, that space would be truly tested. The nights grew longer. The sun set before 5 in the afternoon, and the darkness that followed was profound, moonless, starless, only low clouds that held back the cold like a wet blanket. The wind howled between the houses, whistling through the cracks, shaking doors and windows. People slept less, waking in the middle of the night to the sound of the wind or the cold that seeped in even with heaters on. There was a growing tension, not yet verbalized, but present. A feeling that something was different, that this winter would not be like the previous ones, but no one said it aloud. To say it would be to admit fear, and fear in that community was weakness. So everyone continued pretending that everything was under control, that the traditional solutions would work, that the power wouldn't fail, that the cold wouldn't win. And the young woman, alone in her house on the edge of the village, simply waited, because she knew that waiting was all she could do now. The storm arrived on a Tuesday, without warning from the forecasting systems the community consulted. The sky darkened at midday, turning the day into a grey twilight. The wind gradually increased, going from a steady breeze to violent gusts that ripped off dry branches and pushed loose objects through the streets. The snow began to fall in the late afternoon, not in delicate flakes, but in dense bursts that reduced visibility to a few meters. Within hours, the white layer on the ground was more than half a meter thick. People rushed indoors, locking doors, closing windows, turning on every available heater. The electricity still worked, but the lights flickered occasionally, signaling instability in the grid. The wind pushed the snow against the walls, accumulating irregular mounds that blocked doors and buried first-story windows. The sound was deafening: howling wind, snow pounding against glass, wood creaking under pressure. Nobody went out. Nobody tried. It was too dangerous. On the first night of the storm, 3 transformers burned out in quick succession. The first one shut down at 8 o'clock at night, cutting power to 6 houses in the western part of the village. Families lit candles, turned on flashlights, and covered themselves with all the blankets they had. They thought it would be temporary, but an hour later the second transformer failed, leaving 12 more houses in the dark. And shortly before midnight, the third one gave way, extinguishing power to the grocery store, the church, and 15 other properties. More than half the village was without power. The electric heaters stopped. The lights went out. The heat accumulated in the rooms began to dissipate rapidly. The wooden walls, even insulated, could not retain heat without a continuous source. The internal temperature of the houses dropped at a steady rate, 1 degree every 20 minutes. In a few hours, the interior was as cold as the exterior. People huddled together in small rooms, closing interior doors, trying to concentrate the little body heat they generated. But it wasn't enough. Fireplaces and wood-burning stoves became the only source of heat for those who owned them. But not all houses had functional chimneys. Some had been blocked years ago when electricity became reliable. Others had chimneys clogged with birds' nests or accumulated soot. Trying to use them now meant filling the house with toxic smoke. Families who managed to light fireplaces faced another problem. The firewood ran out quickly. Keeping the fire burning day and night consumed more wood than they had stored. In 2 days, piles that should have lasted weeks were half gone, and there was no way to get more. The storm continued, relentless, burying the village under ever-thick layers of snow. Doors were blocked, windows were covered. The outside world disappeared under a white and hostile blanket. People were trapped inside houses that were slowly turning into icy traps. The pipes began to freeze on the morning of the third day, First in houses without heating, then even in those that still had fireplaces lit. The water inside the pipes expanded as it turned to ice, creating internal pressure that cracked the metal. Families awoke to popping noises, followed by the sound of water gushing in inaccessible places. Some managed to shut off the main water valves before the damage was complete. Others were not so lucky. Water leaked between walls, soaking wood, creating icy lakes on kitchen floors. And when the water stopped gushing, it froze immediately, forming ice sheets that made the rooms even colder. Without running water, people depended on melted snow. But melting snow required heat, and heat was exactly what was lacking. Every simple action became a complex task. Drinking water required melting snow, filtering it, waiting for it to cool enough not to burn the mouth, but not so much that it would freeze again. It was exhausting, and the fatigue accumulated. The children suffered most visibly. Their small bodies lost heat faster, and crying consumed energy they couldn't afford to waste. Parents wrapped them in layers of clothes, blankets, sleeping bags, anything that would retain some warmth. But even so, the little ones shivered incessantly, their lips purple, their fingers numb. Some families began to consider moving to other houses that still had working fireplaces. But moving in the midst of the storm was risky. Visibility was zero. The outside cold would kill in minutes. So they stayed where they were, waiting for the storm to pass, for the power to return, for someone to come and help. But no one came. Because everyone was in the same situation, isolated, threatened, fighting to survive inside their own homes. The young woman, on her isolated property on the outskirts of the village, faced the same cold. Her wooden house lost heat as quickly as the others. The fireplace worked, but the firewood was running out. She rationed carefully, burning only what was necessary to keep the main room minimally habitable. But she knew it wouldn't last. So, on the morning of the fourth day, she made the decision she had been postponing. She went down to the cellar. The stone staircase was icy underfoot, but the steps were free of frost. Down there the temperature was different, not hot, but stable. Close to 5 degrees above zero, maybe 6. There was no wind, there was no snow, there was no excessive humidity. The air was dense but breathable. She lit the oil lamp, and the small flame softly illuminated the space. She sat on one of the reinforced shelves, wrapped herself in a woolen blanket, and simply breathed. The contrast was brutal. Above, everything froze and crumbled. Below, everything remained. She spent the night in the basement. She slept little, but she slept without shivering. When she went up the next morning, the house was even colder. The water she had left in a glass on the table was completely frozen, forming a solid block. The windows had a layer of ice on the inside. Even the wood of the walls seemed too hard, brittle. She understood then that the house above ground was no longer safe. Not that winter, not in that cold. The underground basement, ridiculed by everyone, criticized as an outdated and dangerous idea, was now the only truly habitable place on her entire property. And if it was like that for her, it would probably be like that for others too. But she didn't know if anyone would come. She didn't know if the community would ask for help. She didn't know if collective pride would allow them to admit they were wrong. So she waited, and she continued going down to the basement whenever the cold above became unbearable. The storm began to weaken on the 6th day, but the damage was already done. Accumulated snow blocked roads, buried vehicles, and made any movement impossible. The outside temperature remained at deadly levels, 15 degrees below zero during the day, 20 at night. Without electricity, without enough firewood, without running water, the houses were no longer shelters. They were just icy structures where people desperately tried not to freeze to death. And it was at that moment, when the situation became truly critical, that collective pride began to crack. Because continuing to pretend that everything was under control would mean watching children die of hypothermia. And not even the most rigid pride was worth a life. Especially when there was, on the outskirts of the village, an underground cellar that no one took seriously. Until now. The first person to knock on the door was Marcos, the hoarse-voiced man who had ridiculed the idea of the basement weeks before. He arrived at dawn on the 7th day, walking through knee-deep snow, his body bent against the wind that still blew, though weaker. He knocked on the wooden door 3 times, long pauses between each knock, as if gathering courage for each blow. When the young woman opened it, he said nothing immediately. He just stood there, his breath forming white clouds in the icy air, his eyes avoiding hers. He held a small child in his arms, wrapped in blankets that weren't enough. The child wasn't crying. He was too quiet, dangerously quiet. Marcos finally spoke, his voice low, almost inaudible. His house was uninhabitable. The fireplace had gone out because there was no more firewood. His son was beginning to become unresponsive. He didn't ask for help directly. He only said he had heard about the basement, and he asked, with visible difficulty in every word, if there was still room down there. The young woman didn't hesitate. She simply nodded and indicated the path to the back of the property. Marcos followed, sinking into the snow with each step, holding his son tightly. She went ahead, removing the boards covering the entrance, revealing the stone staircase that descended into the darkness. She lit the lamp that was already down there and went down first, illuminating the path. Marcos descended slowly, careful with each step, protecting his son from the residual cold that still lingered in the transition between the surface and the basement. When they reached the main space of the cellar, the difference was immediate. It wasn't hot, but it wasn't freezing. The air was dense, still, smelling of earth and burnt oil from the lamp. Marcos sat on one of the shelves, still holding his son, and for the first time in days, his body seemed to relax. He didn't thank her. He didn't apologize. He just stayed there, in silence, feeling his body heat slowly return. A few hours later, more people arrived. The elderly neighbor who had shaken her head in pity at the grocery store arrived supported by a younger woman, probably her daughter or granddaughter. Then came the Silver family, who had lost their electric heater. Then the Martins, with frozen pipes, and 3 shivering children. One by one, or in small groups, they began to appear. Some asked permission before going down. Others simply went down, assuming the offer was implicit. The young woman didn't refuse anyone. She didn't ask questions. She didn't demand explanations. She simply showed where the blankets were, where the water was, how to use the oil lamp without wasting oil. The space that seemed small began to hold more people than anyone could have imagined. People organized themselves naturally, occupying corners, sharing blankets, dividing the little warmth they generated together. There was an awkwardness in the air, something unspoken but heavy. The community that had ridiculed that hole now depended on it to survive. No one mentioned the past criticisms. No one offered formal apologies. But there was silent recognition in every averted glance, in every murmured thank you, in every gesture of respect that hadn't existed before. The young woman perceived this. She felt the subtle change in the way people addressed her, no longer with condescension or pity, but with something close to involuntary respect. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Reality spoke for itself. The basement functioned. People were alive. And everyone knew that, without that ridiculed space, some of them wouldn't be. The collective pride didn't shatter explosively, with dramatic admissions of error. It shattered silently, in small pieces, each time someone descended those stone steps and felt the difference between the temperature above and below. Each time a child stopped shivering, each time someone managed to sleep without fear of freezing, the pride dissolved in silence, replaced by something more basic, gratitude for survival. On the night of the 8th day, the outside temperature reached 23 degrees below zero. It was the most brutal cold that region had faced in decades. The wind had stopped completely, leaving the air still and deadly. Without wind, there was no sensation of movement, only pure, dense cold that penetrated anything exposed for more than a few minutes. The few people who still resisted in their own homes began to realize that they would not survive another night. Their bodies could not withstand it, especially the oldest and the youngest. Then they all came at once, not in solitary marches, but in small groups, entire families, neighbors helping neighbors, carrying sleeping children, supporting elderly people who could barely walk. The snow was so compacted that it formed a hard crust on which it was possible to walk without sinking completely. They arrived at the young woman's property like refugees from a silent war, faces marked by the cold, eyes sunken with exhaustion. And they all went to the same place, the underground cellar. The space was overcrowded. More than 20 people crammed into a 12 square meter area. There was no comfort. There was no privacy. But there was collective warmth. The basement's internal temperature, which had previously fluctuated between 5 and 6 degrees, rose to 9, then to 11, driven by the body heat of so many bodies close together. The seal the young woman had installed months before worked perfectly. The heat generated by the bodies was retained, circulating slowly, warming the space gradually but constantly. The compacted earth walls absorbed excess moisture from the exhaled air, keeping the environment dry enough to breathe comfortably. The oil lamp remained lit, hanging from the central beam, offering weak but sufficient light for everyone to see each other. The ventilation pipe that rose to the surface allowed for minimal air renewal, preventing the accumulation of carbon dioxide without letting the cold in uncontrollably. Every technical detail that seemed small during construction now sustained lives. People instinctively organized themselves. The stronger adults sat on the edges, creating a human barrier against the cold walls. The children stayed in the center, wrapped in stacked blankets, protected by layers of bodies and fabrics. The elderly were accommodated on reinforced shelves. raised off the floor where the air was slightly warmer. No one complained about the cramped space. No one asked for more comfort. Everyone understood that being alive was enough. The young woman circulated among the people, distributing water from the jugs she had stored, offering pieces of dry bread, checking if anyone needed anything urgently. She didn't assume a leadership role, but people naturally looked to her when they had doubts, and she responded with simple gestures, short words, practical guidance. There were no speeches, there was no drama, just the silent management of an extreme situation. During the night, some children began to cry, not from fear, but from discomfort and accumulated exhaustion. Their parents calmed them with whispers, gentle rocking, promises that it would pass. And it would. Because there, in that buried space, they were safe. The outside temperature could drop to 30 degrees below zero. It could snow another meter. The wind could blow strong enough to tear off roofs. None of that mattered. The basement was indifferent to what happened on the surface. It existed on another layer of reality, protected by the earth itself, stable by nature and not by continuous effort. The hours passed slowly. Someone began to sing softly, an old song that many knew. Others joined in, weak but synchronized voices, creating a muffled melody that filled the space. It wasn't a celebration. It was just a way to mark time, to stay awake, to remember that they were still alive. In the middle of the night, the oil lamp began to flicker. The oil was running out. The young woman noticed immediately and acted quickly. She had more oil stored, but in a distant corner of the cellar, behind seated people. She excused herself, carefully moving between bodies, and reached the reserve gallon. She refilled the lamp precisely, without spilling, without wasting. The flame burned brightly again, illuminating tired but relieved faces. That small flame was more than light. It was a symbol of continuity, that someone had thought of everything, that there would be no fatal surprises. And everyone realized this. They realized that every gallon of water, every candle, every blanket, every detail of that space had been planned. Nothing was there by chance. Everything had a purpose. And that purpose was exactly what kept them alive at that moment. Morning arrived without many noticing. There were no windows in the basement. There was no way to see the sunrise. Only the gradual feeling that the night had passed, that a few more hours had been overcome. When someone went up to check the situation outside, they returned with mixed news. The temperature was still brutal, but the sky was beginning to clear. The storm was finally losing strength. There would be another day, perhaps two, of extreme cold. But then, the situation would improve. It would be slow, but it would improve. The people in the basement received the information in silence. There was no celebration, only acceptance that they would need to hold on a little longer. And they would, because they had somewhere to stay, because they had a space that functioned exactly as it should, because someone, months ago, had done something that everyone considered absurd. And that absurdity was now the difference between life and death. The cold receded slowly over 3 days. The outside temperature rose degree by degree, from 23 to 15, then to 8, until finally reaching 0 and continuing to rise. The snow began to melt at the edges, creating small streams of icy water that cut through the village. People remained in the cellar until the situation above ground became safe again. When they finally came up, they found a scene of silent devastation. Houses with cracked pipes, windows broken by ice, structures damaged by the pressure of the accumulated snow. But no one had died. Not a single life was lost in that brutal winter, and everyone knew why. The underground cellar, ridiculed as an outdated and useless idea, had saved more than 20 people. That truth didn't need to be proclaimed. It was imprinted on the faces of those who descended the stone steps when there was no other option. The community changed after that January, not noisily, but profoundly. Conversations at the grocery store began to include questions about ancient techniques, natural insulation, and how to build functional underground spaces. 3 families started digging their own root basements, seeking guidance from the young woman who had previously been ignored. She responded with her usual calm, explaining technical details without judgment, without resentment for the past. The grocery store owner, who had laughed when she first mentioned the project, now greeted her with genuine respect. Marcos, the man who had arrived with his son in his arms, passed by her property a few weeks later just to thank her. Not with elaborate words, but with a nod and a small smile. She reciprocated in kind. There was no need for more than that. What had happened spoke for itself. Her position in the village transformed without official ceremony. No one appointed her as an expert. No one gave her a title or formal authority. But when doubts arose about preparing for the coming winter, people sought out the young woman. When someone wanted to understand how the earth works, how temperatures behave below the surface, how to choose insulation materials, it was to her that they turned. Her presence ceased to be tolerated and became valued, and she accepted this new role with the same reserve she always had, without arrogance, without needing constant validation. She simply continued doing what she always did, observing, preparing, trusting in the knowledge that came from the patience and memory of past generations. The cellar remained open, accessible, a permanent reminder that what seems ridiculous may be precisely what sustains everyone when everything else fails. Stories like this deserve to be shared because they remind us that silent preparation is worth more than blind trust. If you follow such accounts, consider subscribing. Each shared story helps others see the value of what has been forgotten.